Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, Understanding People and Creating the Human Digital Twin, adopted for PMOs of all sizes and shapes to improve delivery. So today we're joined by Donnie MacNicol, Complex Change Catalyst. He energizes leaders and teams delivering complex change to maximize value and certainty of success through a focus on the human dimension. He's an expert program and organizational consultant with a passion for personal development, change and strategy, offering consultancy and delivery services to organizations, both the public and private sector, from multinationals to SMEs. Currently, he's leading a change and transformation team on a major digital transformation in the transportation sector and team developing the university's digital strategy. In the last 4 years, Donnie has done work in the UK Parliament, a digital design studio, a financial services organisation, regulated body, investment bank, and the government of a Baltic state, as well as the nuclear, retail and space sectors. So quite a broad range. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Donnie.
Thank you very much for tuning in. So yeah, thank you for joining me. It's an area of real passion I'm going to talk about today and hopefully get some feedback and answer some questions as well. Paul has kindly done an intro to myself, so I don't need to go through that. This will all be in the slide pack. And what I want to go through with you and also get your feedback on is we're going to do a little bit about understanding yourself and how does that help you to, in a PMO context, touch on a little bit about leadership, touch a little bit about teams as well. So this is a kind of core foundation. Then say, jump to, if you understand yourself, what does this mean for how you can practice the project program portfolio change management and the kind of PMO element of all of that. And then jump on again to think about, well, how far might taking this understanding self go from an individual interaction point of view, team dynamics and so on. So we'll jump right out and I'll talk about a little experiment that we did not that long ago around that. So let's just jump out to the vision, first of all, for where could this be? If you went out 5 or 10 years from now, there is a Nirvana state that we're all thinking of when the data is readily available, single source of the truth. We have understanding, it's accessible, it is interpretable, and it is predicting. So where you want to get to is it's predicting what will happen, how things will happen, and you can apply that just in such the same way to projects as well. And who knows, you might even have an equivalent of Tom Cruise on your project helping you to decide and make decisions and help with delivery. So that's what I want to get to towards the end, is how far can you take this understanding self right the way through to how that can be applied in the project context, you know, and what might be achievable in 5, 10, in a few years' time. So first of all, let's deal with the foundational bit, which is about where does this all begin? Well, you've got to understand yourself to allow you to understand others. And I use a simple model called DISC in most of the work that we do. There is a myriad of structures and tools. Some of these aren't necessarily DISC-based, I'm showing up here, but they're all, most of them have got a kind of fundamental DNA within the DISC world and means of distinguishing between different types of people. As I say, there are many forms of it, and I'm sure over the years many of you in the call will have used one at some point. But fundamentally, what is it they do? They help you. This is everything I do with things like DISC is like what is it? What do you do with it? And if it's you, I always jump to, okay, so what that helps you to do is to think about how might a better understanding of you help you with how you communicate, you delegate, you celebrate things, how you motivate others, how you build teams, and so on. So it's about you, and we're all very different. We're like, you know, cuts through a tree. We may look broadly similar from the outside between certain people, but inside there are many, many different shapes, and we do all of these things typically very differently. So the model, as I say, is DISC-based. I want to, if you're interested, you please go and there is a myriad of papers and so on written about it, and I will give you a link later to find out more. Very useful model. I will describe a little bit more. Very universal. I say it's used extensively, and there's very many different ways of visualizing. Even the DISC different combinations of colors, different combinations of axes, different orientations of it. This is the model I use, and I'll explain why later we use it like that. But that model helps you to understand yourself, then it helps you to understand relationships, team dynamics, and right the way up into functional or organizational groups. So it's very useful. You can apply it all the way up in different levels if you have the, again, if you have the information on which to do that. So I'm sure many of you will have watched Guardians of the Galaxy, and this is Groot, and Groot only says, "I am Groot," and the only person that seems to be able to understand what he says all the time is Rocket. So Rocket has found a way to understand Groot, even though it would, for many others, they do not understand what Groot is saying. Now, it's a kind of extreme example, but when you're looking at things like the DISC model, people tend to understand people like themselves, who talk like them, who structure their thinking in that way. Rocket just seems to have a certain aptitude to be able to do it with Groot. Now, I was very conscious in this session today, I'm not going to try and teach any of this, much as I would love to have the time to get into this in more detail. I'm going to talk more about it, and you can look at this later. It's more about, this is something that would be great if you understood, because how does that impact what you do in your role? And I'm imagining that the bulk of the people on the call are from within the project management, so the PMO world, at project program, portfolio, change, transformation, enterprise, etc. So DISC model helps you to distinguish between different types of people. So are you more task orientated or people orientated? Are you more outgoing? Are you more reserved? I haven't taken out the explanatory material behind this, because I say I just want to today to talk about the so what. This is a model. If you have it, then what can you do with that? And for each of these types, they've got a certain description. So, you know, and one thing I should mention is that for anyone in the call who gets frustrated by people putting slides up with a lot of words on it and then not allowing people to read what all the words are, I apologize in advance, because I am going to go quite fast and furious, and it's not really about trying to go through all the specifics of this. You'll get all of this material. It's more about the distinctions that I'm trying to make. So for each of the different styles, you have, well, I've got a description within this. We'll just take a couple of examples here. So people who are up here more, our focus is about getting the thing done, the task. People down this end, so these two colours down here at this end of the spectrum, tend to be the primary focus initially is around the people, how orientated they are to people and the relationships they have with people, and vice versa. In the other axes, it's people over here tend to be more reserved, this tends to be more outgoing. I'm very conscious this is where it comes into pigeonholing, and also the fact that these are nice clean boxes. Nobody is a single colour, everyone is a combination of all four. It's just that it's kind of prominent and secondary and so on. So I'll just say that once, but please take it as read. I'm not trying to say you pigeonhole somebody. Everyone's a combination, and it doesn't necessarily change. So there's a good model, but I'll just give an example of what the differences are. So if you've got a green, somebody who's very supportive, nurturing, strong networks, very good team players, very courteous, possibly working with a red who's up here, very goal orientated, go getter, wants to take charge of situations, no nonsense approach. You potentially get clashes between, say, the green and the red, because they may not quite understand the approach they're taking. Say it's a green that's running the PMO, and it's a red who's a member of it, or the red who is the sponsor of the PMO, and the green is the PMO manager or director. All of a sudden, you've got a potential for misunderstanding. Needless to say, it doesn't necessarily have to happen, but it could happen, especially when you've got colours at either end of the the spectrum, i.e. diagonally opposite, because you've got 2 points of difference here. So similarly, you know, if you're blue, you're very analytic, systematic, task orientated, like doing research, determining risk, calculating margins of error. And then you've got somebody down here, like myself, who getting others excited about their vision, fast pace, upbeat, tend to build alliances, bring people together, come up with concepts and ideas. That's a very different from the blue and the yellow. Neither is right, neither is better. It just is a distinction. And I'm talking here, by the way, just to make the point again, at people at the extreme end of blue, the extreme end of yellow. But what is gold does is when the blue and the yellow can work together and accept each other's strengths and the challenges of working together, and you can get great teams that work in that way. You know, and there are core strengths and ways to engage with these different types of colours, which again I've left in here for you to have a look at. But you know, you can imagine, you know, D's in a team will very much about focus and insisting in the results. I's generate, promote ideas. The C's will make certain that details are covered, and greens be very much about the stability to the group, and good quality of relationships exist within the group. So each one has got its own strengths. And we do kind of exercises when we've done that. As I say, I'm going through all this very quick. This is just the foundational level. Use the exercise like this, again, feel free to do this, is, you know, if you're trying to engage with a stakeholder, if you knew, I'll just flick back for a moment, if you knew what the orientation or style of that person is, let's just say it's a red, a dominant, you could sit and say, so what is it you would do with a red? When would you do it? Where, how, and who? So this is just one example of engaging from us with a stakeholder. So it's a people-centric view, a people-centric thing about how do I engage with a stakeholder. And if you want to find out your style, you can use this IMA link, ima-pm.co.uk. For those more observant, you'll notice that the green and the blue are different. Please note that is the only difference from DISC. So the green and the blue just switch the color, not the words, just the use of the color. Different technique, and it was only last week that I'd actually hit 10,000 completions on the IMA, so I need to write an article about that, but that's for another day. Or there is a more nuanced version on the pure DISC profile, which you can get your red, blue, green, and yellow percentages to using that. And again, I've used that in a number of cases, and I'm sure many of you will have done something very similar. So, but it's about applying it. And I have to say, this is genius. Walking by a bookshop a year or two ago, I saw this book here, which is Surrounded by Idiots, and it's the 4 types of human behaviour. And it's like, whichever colour you are, everyone else can sometimes seem like a bit of an idiot. And I thought it was absolutely genius, and the chap has written a book, and I think it's now sold a couple of million copies. But fundamentally, it's about applying DISC in the real world. So how do you apply this kind of thing in reality? And we're going to just go through a couple of very quick concepts. You know, your leadership style. Well, if you knew what your typical profile is, so let's say I'm a S, steady, my style tends to be very much about participating, tend to be highly supportive, low directive, so I wouldn't necessarily direct, but I'd be supportive. They rely on, therefore, building good, strong one-to-one relationships, and their level of control comes through the support that they provide to people. So if you knew what your style was and you had a means of distinguishing a shape of a project, you then get into a very interesting point of saying, well, actually, for members of a PMO or project managers, program managers, if you knew their typical leadership style, strengths and weaknesses, you can then start relating that to a type of project. And I'm jumping over this incredibly quickly because this little model here, the diamond model, is worthy of an hour in its own right. But many and a number of organizations we've worked with tried to say, typically, these types of profiles might be better suited to certain types of projects or not. You can imagine a project that is high pace, that's what that is representing. So a project that's of high pace, it might be that certain styles aren't quite as comfortable because they've been forced to make decisions very quickly without having time to gather the information that they think is appropriate to make it. So there's an application of this from a leadership point of view. And then, a little bit about teams. I'll just give you a few minutes. This always usually brings a bit of a snigger. And I could leave that up for a few minutes, I won't, but that's the kind of normal structure that you might have in a team, goodness me. But that's before you start applying anything like DISC in the different styles. This is just the things that go on within teams. I'm sure not a team that you've ever worked in. And this, just a couple of examples of running stuff. This was, I think, a Warwick Manufacturing Group, and we're bringing teams together and building bridges. But what I wanted to talk to you about was, if you think about those profiles I showed before in terms of the DISC profiles, there's a team there that had 14 blues, 4, 6, and 3 other colours, as you can see. So the team is heavily skewed towards blues. And interestingly, most of the senior management in this team were actually within either blue or red. 2 years later, the team was 14 and 6, and the greens and the yellows had left because the team was it was too great a focus, and basically the greens and the yellows just didn't feel that they fitted in, especially seeing as the senior management was primarily within the yellow and red. So there's an example of how, once you've got a bit of an understanding of an individual, you can start to see what the impact is then in terms of colours. Another example here of a team we're working with not that long ago. So you can see, rather than the individual colours, if you look at how skewed from one side to that, I mean 13 against 3, you can see the team's heavily skewed towards being very assertive and directive, when in fact, very different style of the way that the greens and blues would do things. But that's the wonderful thing about teams, is that you have a whole combination of wonderful colours. You bring them together, and you get primary roles that people may take, but people can, of course, be flexible. A yellow can act like a blue when required, and a blue a yellow, and a red a green. Some people are more flexible than others, and particularly around what primary role that they might take in a team. So I am conscious that before I jump on, that's the kind of foundation stone that I want to then build on. So that's if you have an understanding yourself, you then start to get into an interesting place of understanding how that can impact your leadership, how the leadership can then start to impact the type of project or PMO world that you're in, and then you can start to get into the dynamics of teams and understanding what the impact might be of certain profiles of team. Now, that is all totally and utterly readily available to almost everyone. And dare I say, you don't necessarily need to book in to go on a course 3 months hence to do this. There are simple tools that are available in PMOs to allow you to do it. And I've provided just that IMA link earlier, for example, is very quick and easy, 10 questions, and it gives you something to have a conversation around. So there's a very, very immediate, quick thing to do. So that's kind of the first part I wanted to cover off. The next part is, which is starting, this isn't necessarily unique to myself, but the next part I would say is, because what we did is to say, well, if we created something called Team Praxis, which is, well, if you've got this understanding of a profile, how might it apply into the actual project program portfolio world? So how does the people impact the process? And I needed to find somewhere to vent my thinking, and fortunately, working with Adrian and Julie at Praxis, we found a way of doing it, and it's now built into the Praxis framework. So let me just explain what that means in practice. I mentioned earlier about how we do things all differently. Well, we do all these other things differently as well, more on a kind of project program. We perceive, we design, we adopt, we deploy, we practice, we involve others, we learn from things in different ways. So how does that apply to this world of project program portfolio management, which is what Praxis is all about? That's what it collapses together, all three in the one place. So what we did was we chose areas that we wanted to apply this kind of thinking to. That was the list. I'm just taking one example here, and it's a very people-centric one, but I could have chosen governance or financial management or risk. And we said, well, if you know what the profile of the person is, how might they react? So in this case, how would they propose, or what would they want to see in relation to stakeholder management or governance or risk? So how would they, each colour, do it differently? Because the one thing that's not built into any of the project management literature, materials and so on, is how do individual human differences make an actual difference in the delivery of the mechanics, the systems, the tools and structures of project program portfolio management. That's what Team Praxis was developed to do. So I'll just dive in a little bit more. So there's what stakeholder management looks like. So if you were a blue, you would typically propose or want to see this process-orientated view of stakeholder management done in a different way. If it was a yellow, it would be a different approach. So they do stakeholder management differently from each other and with slightly different outcomes and different outputs required. So we map this kind of material. All of this, by the way, is freely available on the Praxis website. Because I'm so passionate about it, I wanted to get this out there and get people's feedback. And I know a number of people have tried using this or are using this to help in their project delivery. So in a PMO, you could be saying, crikey, I've never really applied this or thought about how the individual differences make a difference to the way we do each of the management functions like risk or planning or so on. So this is a way of very much doing it. And just to give you an example, you know what, if you know that, let's say this is around assurance. So we did some work for a nuclear client recently, and so it was around risk and assurance. So if you know you're up here and you're a blue, then you should maybe think, crikey, that's my way of doing things. I wonder if there is a different way of doing it, because the situation may demand a different approach, a red or a yellow or a green way of doing it. So that's the first thing you might be able to do. Next one is, if you're working with others, you might start thinking, well, actually, if I'm here and the key person I work with is there, we either can spend lots of time misunderstanding each other, or we can find a way of working together because that person has got a different approach to me. Together, they may work extremely well. And then you can get into thinking about the team profile. If you know your team is spread out in this kind of profile across the different 4 styles, then you start to think, so what's that create dynamically? So you've got a lot of people down here, less people up here. What does that mean? So that's the kind of way you can practically apply this, with not just from an individual or a relationship, but you can actually apply it from a team point of view. And just a very simple point, here's an example around portfolio management. We're working at the moment with a small team of peers who have just developed a digital strategy for a university. Now we're helping their portfolio management function. And I would argue, slightly a seminar or webinar in its own right, that portfolio management is a human endeavour more than project and program management, I would even argue. And so we used this in a similar way, or we're using it to get an understanding of how different styles would implement portfolio management, and also how they operate portfolio management, because there is no single way of doing anything. There's always multiple ways of doing it, and this was really helpful to try and do that. So again, I'll maybe stop at that, Paul, and see if there's any questions. So I've now, if you just quick sum, I've now jumped from applying the understanding the human condition, the style. Then I've added in this extra dimension of how does that get applied into our often perceived as hard world of project program portfolio management, which, as we all know, is PMO or delivery professionals know that that is not the case. And how do you map the two together? And this is, as I say, I think pretty unique what we've developed with Adrian Dooley at Praxis. But I'm going to jump on again into digital twins in just a moment. So any particular questions? So to the first point, that's fantastic that the disc profile was useful. To say that's great to hear. I see that a lonely yellow and lots of reds. I was thinking of leaving the team. It is gold dust if you can get if you can have these conversations within a team and say, crikey, I could give you examples of multiple teams we worked in to the extreme of people leaving, as that example, like one example I gave earlier, through to the board of construction companies, and the only person on the board who was still not a director was the green, because greens are likely the most unassuming, unpushy, not involved typically within the kind of financial structures because it's not their area of expertise. And lo and behold, the board were all sitting going, my God, this explains why that person's never made a director, which is all a bit awkward in a one-day workshop when you realise that kind of stuff in the morning. And the other point is it good to understand how readily people change roles. I am not a psychologist, but your personality is broadly set at a early age, by the time you're into your 10, 11s and so on, it tends to be set. It can change through traumatic or other events in life, but broadly your personality. Some people can be very flexible and they can change, adapt, modify to suit the situation and suit others. Many others don't, and they are who they are and they can't change that. So you don't choose your personality in an instance. I think, Ashok, it is what it is. It's just you should be adapting your style. It's why I've been using the word style rather than personality. These colours, the way I like to think of it, they recognise or they likely predict your preference or style in a typical situation. I am not a psychologist and I do not want to get into deep discussions about personality. It's actually about saying somebody maybe back just a little bit, Ashok, is to say, if you say, oh, I'm a blue, I'm always a blue and I always do exactly what it says in this box, if me and Adrian happen to have got it right, that's not great, because there might be a situation that requires you to be more yellow and adopt that kind of behaviour to achieve an end outcome. And if you are a PMO, project portfolio professional, often you're trying to get an outcome from others. So it's really incumbent on you to often be the person that flexes to get the outcome that you need, improve the relationship, get the report information that you need in that way, and so on. Cool, right, so now let's take a jump out. As I say, I'm very conscious that I'm going at 100 miles an hour on this, but I did want to leave plenty of time for questions. If you dial up what we've been talking about up many, many notches over a number of years, what you're thinking of, if this is just one simple bit of information, which is having somebody's disk profile or something similar, imagine you could take it much further and you have got a very rich picture of an individual. Now, this is just a BBC article from earlier in the year, saying that you might have a thinking digital twin within a decade. Now, I think that's maybe a little bit ambitious personally, but hey, I'm not an expert on that, and it might not be the case. So, but it is something that is being thought about and so on. So how would you apply it if we had that information in the context we've been talking about? So if I'm just slightly indulgent for a moment, my little company had a vision for a profession where the human dimension is embedded into all areas and where projects are delivered more successfully. That's kind of where team Praxis the thinking came from. And Team Praxis' mission was then to enhance team and delivery performance through human and behavioural insights and make it available freely on the Team Praxis website. Now, I'm now jumping into another group, which I haven't mentioned. I've had the pleasure since last year of being a member of, and I will describe in just a moment, so a little bit more about the Project Data Analytics Task Force. And there is a group within it called the Human Performance, and they have the Human Performance Vision. And its vision, it's its draft, I may add, is for improved project performance through insights gained from readily available data. So it's a data function, and the impact of people and projects. And the mission for this particular element is providing project professionals with freely available digital tools which impact human dimension, etc. You can read that as well as myself. Why? What is the link to that? Well, for you to get the insights that I've just gone through with that DISC profile, you often need to go out and get either training organization or consultancy. You pay some money, they do the DISC profile, you get the results back, you do it often in a workshop, so you've got to get everyone together for it, etc. I'm not decrying that. I've made a very nice, enjoyable living out of doing partly that. Less so in the last 5 years, been more about program direction. It's actually delivering on programs, but that's been fantastic. But what we'd like to do, the Project Data Analytics Task Force, is to create it freely available digital tools that anybody could be going and doing this at an individual. We've talked about team and organizational perspective. So that's kind of what we want to get to, which is, easily and readily available tools that allow you to do this. And there are many, many things that you would need to consider. We talked about DISC. I mean, that's one layer to try and get in someone's head. I mean, biases. I think there are hundreds of different types of biases that people have. And wouldn't it be amazing to think if you had an understanding of which biases you had in your thinking, on top of this, on top of various other things, which I'm just going to mention. But the question is, how far do you want to go with this? Now, needless to say, Harvard Business Review and all these other eminent organizations come out with fantastic quotes and materials. Here's one, of course, from Jurassic Park in 1993. And Jeff Goldblum's character saying, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think they should. Well, a little bit jokey, but their PMO psychologists and data analysts were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think they should. Some people will get a little bit uncomfortable with what I'm talking about. I'm not saying this should be done. It's just, it would be interesting to think if we had this level of information about individuals that we're talking about. So, imagine you had the following data and you were able to capture, have the capacity, capability to analyze it, an ability to gain insight and opportunity from it. Now, from an individual, it might be, we've talked about personality. There are other things that give you an idea about your motivation, your individual work preferences, your energy levels, and the list goes on. There's the biases we've talked about, your physiological state versus your emotional state. So this information that you're looking at here, this is just two around the kind of physiological states. This is a good Apple world, and I happen to use something called Whoop. So you think, crikey, imagine in project meetings or working with a stakeholder, there was not only did you have an indication of a personality, but you had an indication of all the other layers of how they're motivated, what their preferences are for the way information is, they like information presented to them, which, by the way, often comes from things like DISC as well. The biases towards different things and types of information, the ways decisions are made, etc. But you even had understanding about a physiological or emotional state. Not impossible. The data is available in there. And then interactions. So if that's just the individual, who's interacting with who? So if that in person is interacting with a person who's different, Where are they doing it, for what purpose, and for how long? So then you're getting into mapping formal and informal networks, which is a whole topic its own right. Then you get into thinking about, well, what information is actually shared? It's likely not difficult to, given various security and privacy issues, but able to understand what information has been shared with whom, bring in all the areas around team dynamics that we talked about earlier, and then applying some of this into project program world. What's the objective assessment of where the project is at this particular moment, and the subjective, and I'll come on to this in a moment, around projects, is doing sentiment analysis, how people are feeling with respect to success, and so all of that is available at this point. Does it exist? I'll just explain a quick experiment that I've been involved with, but it is possible. Now, the number of use cases are enormous. If you're working, this is just an example from a program management course we run, a mock-up of a team. If you've got various interaction between them, if you had that layers of information between it, and this is perceived as where the relationship issues are, you would actually be able to have an understanding of why those relationship issues are happening. Or even more effectively, could you be predicting that those problems will occur, and therefore you've got a strategy to ensure that you don't end up with a disgruntled stakeholder who then goes on to cause major issues across the project. And if you can, so it's the predictive nature of data and data analytics that I tie into the human data and information and the readily available elements of that. And that's where, as I said, if somebody told me 3 or 4 years ago, I would put as much energy and effort into thinking about data as I do to the human condition, I would never have believed them. But the worlds are, in my mind, collapsing, because you can only, the readily available use of data, the ability that data could give you to do the things you could only dream of previously. And then in this example here around reporting, let's just say if you had that very rich understanding, let's say, of Elena Lenova, this character, and all that data earlier about that and understanding, you could gear project reports to when they want them, how they want them presented, to the level of detail, the bias towards what they want to see and don't want to see presented to them, etc., etc. The list goes on. So the number of use cases, when I say is infinite, it is. I've sat with some people and we tried mapping, this out, and it was a kind of fool's errand, because we ran into 100 without even breaking sweat about how you could apply this into it. So many ways of applying this. And what I wanted to do was to finish up about, rather than just talking about it, and then I'll come back to some questions, a little experiment we did at the Project Data Analytics Hack earlier this year, and it was an experiment doing exactly what I've been talking about in a small way. So there was no major conclusions that came out of it. I just wanted to describe what we did to give you an idea about the kinds of things that you could do. This was the lovely group of people we had together within the group. I'm also, sorry, I'll just share with you why I've got slightly flummoxed. I think I must have hidden a slide by accident earlier on in my presentation, which described what the Project Data Analytics Task Force is and how it functions and how it works. So apologies if I seem in the last few minutes slightly jumping around. I've just realized I must have inadvertently hidden it when I was putting the pack together, finished it this morning. So apologies. There is a little bit more about the task force in there, but I won't go back for the sake of time. But this was a group that are involved within the task force in different ways, and the hack plays an important part in that. This hack is actually not this one, this is hack 15, but hack 17 is happening as we speak in the Tottenham Hotspur ground in London. I had the pleasure of going along yesterday morning for a couple of hours to it, and it was absolutely fantastic event to attend. And a number of the challenges that were getting discussed at the hack actually had a very strong human bias to them. So this group came together, and I'm just going to flick through this just to give you an idea what we were doing. We used something called meeting quality, and meeting quality that gathers data typically after a meeting, and from that data it's able to analyze a whole series of things. It doesn't really particularly matter about how broadly it can, but it does get various things about project performance and so on. But the kinds of thing we did is we got an understanding of the different types of profiles from the different teams at the hack. So MQ profile, by the way, is my own version of DISC, which we've built into meeting quality. So it's the same thing as we talked about previously. So an understanding of that started to get interesting. These are a collection of certain teams within the hacks. There's hundreds of people attend. But this was combinations of, there's many more people hidden away underneath here, but it starts to give you an understanding about how the overall makeup of people attending, but also more importantly, in individual teams, how they were made up of groups of anything from 4 or 5 up to like 8 or 10. Things about, we even had the judges complete the profile as well as the people doing it, and starting to see what the difference was between in a particular team versus the judges who were scoring them. Because what we wanted to test here was, like a project, would you be able to predict how the performance of a particular hack challenge over the 2 days, and how well the judges would perceive it? So it's kind of like a project comes to the end of 2 days, and then your senior stakeholders, your sponsors, assess, was that successful? It's kind of applying that type of thinking. And we had information about team demographics, about, was the new hack, first hack, are they a leader in the world? The behavioural insights likely very interesting. How not? So these questions here were asked using a sliding scale at multiple points during the 2 days, and we were able to build up behavioural insights over time about high performing and low performing teams based on the feedback that they were giving us throughout the 2 days. There was stuff around questions learned, for example, how cool they thought the technology was, and did that change with time within individual teams. And we even had written responses, so feeding it through a number of different tools that we had to create word clouds, and to get even an emoji cloud to give us an idea how people were feeling during it. So we had some real fun in that, but we were able to analyze that written responses. And in fact, if you put the words through IBM's Watson engine, you're actually able to get the underlying emotions like sadness, joy, analytics, confidence, and so on. So again, I'm conscious I'm going at 100 miles an hour here, but it was just to show we had a go at this just to see how it might work. And some of the findings, it seemed to be the only point that we could relate. This was just the first experiment. We're going to try it again in Hack 18 next year in a lot more detail, is to this issue around how cool a technology was. And that was one thing that seemed to be, if a team had a high level of assessment how cool they thought the technology was, the judges tended to agree. So thank you. Conscious I've gone through an awful lot, and I've done it very quickly, but I wanted to share my excitement and passion for this collapse now of the human dimension overlapping directly into the PMO, project program portfolio world, and then moving it on and say, my goodness, where might this actually go into this kind of human digital twin view of the world? And who might be managing all these? What's going to be PMOs that are going to be making all of this happen? So switch back for questions and so on. Right, there's one question here about somebody's asked a question about, back to the Jeff Goldblum point, should we be doing this kind of data mining of individuals? it's been ridiculed. Well, sorry, there's very negative uses of it, as we know, Facebook, Google, and so on. Should we actually be doing it? Well, I don't think it's a matter of whether we should. It likely will end up happening, and there'll be a minimum amount of data that almost will be usable publicly, whether I'm guessing, but there'll be information that people will have to agree to share for it to go any further and to get the deeper insight that's we're talking about here. Not many people, for example, might want their whoop band connected into a team so that they know what my physiological state is during a workshop. That may be extremely uncomfortable for people. To be honest, it likely is for me as well, thinking about it. Another good question here: if you know how someone ticks or works and you take advantage of their weakness, is that not understand sort of cheating? I know some people feel very uncomfortable with that kind of information being made available or being discussed. That's why I don't like to tend to get into it at a personality level, keep it relatively high level about preferences and styles. And I don't think somebody could lightly use this information in a negative way. I can't, if you keep it at high level, I'm not sure quite what that might be, but this kind of insight is used in many ways. You know, salespeople often try and understand the personality of the person that they're talking to, because they know the best way to approach them, what to highlight, what not to highlight, the order in which they should give them the information. All of that is absolutely built into normal sales training nowadays, and you can get an assessment of somebody usually pretty quickly within a minute or two if you've had some level of training around that. So I can see you could use it for negative reasons, but you can also use it for very positive reasons of building a relationship with somebody quickly and easily, and giving them what they need as quickly as they can, as you possibly can. Another question about why would I allow them the information, allow them to be manipulated? Again, I know a single person that's asking these questions. I guess it's going to be your choice really as to whether you do, but I wouldn't necessarily think about it manipulating. It's that we've all got a particular style. If I adapt my style to get a better relationship and a better outcome, hopefully for that person and for myself, then that's likely a positive outcome. I do get the fact that you could likely influence things in a negative way as well, but hopefully none of the people on the call would be doing that. It's about the end outcome, whatever, if you're in the PMO or wherever you happen to work. And somebody else putting about the fact that using the insights, yeah, I mean, insights discovery, similar to DISC, it's built in the same underlying structure of it, and they've got another distinction which equates to the conscious and the less conscious profiles. Every profile has got usually something unique, and insights does it between conscious and less conscious. And they've said that in my experience, the less conscious equates to personality, while the conscious equates to trained behaviour. Yeah, very good distinction between it. Again, just try and often keep away from the word personality, because, as I say, and the way we use it, do not use it as from an HR or perspective. It's about gaining insight and trying to improve performance, typically in the projects world.
Thank you very much for a very interesting, fascinating talk about how to apply this, and perhaps some of the challenges faced with it and insights of how we can use it. I've certainly found it very, very interesting. And so thank you once again, and I'm sure everybody else would thank you as well.
Thank you, Emma, Ruth, for being asked to do it as well to begin with. Yeah, thank you very much for support, everyone.